All right, hey everyone. So, whether you're prepping for the UPSC or just really fascinated by how India really works, I think you're going to find this deep dive super interesting. We're going to kind of peek behind the curtain today.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's easy to think Indian politics is just what we see play out, in parliament, right?
Right.
But there's actually this whole intricate system of committees and groups advising the prime minister and, really shaping, the direction the country's going in.
Exactly. And, we're going to be talking about cabinet committees and groups of ministers. Groups of ministers are often called GOMS.
Right?
So, and, these aren't exactly terms you hear every day, right? But if you're studying for the UPSC, understanding how these committees and groups work, it's really crucial to, to understanding Indian polity.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really like having this, insider's view, into how things work. And, even for the average citizen, just trying to understand, the news or how policies are made, knowing about these groups can really help you see the bigger picture of how India functions.
Okay, so let's start with cabinet committees. Now, these are these high-level advisory bodies that help the prime minister, tackle all sorts of issues. But what's really interesting is that they aren't actually directly mentioned in the Constitution.
That's right, yeah. They're actually set up through what's called the rules of business. It's basically like this set of guidelines for how the government works, and it makes cabinet committees kind of, extra constitutional.
Extra constitutional, okay. That sounds pretty powerful.
Right.
Does that mean they have more freedom or power than, say, a ministry?
Yeah, in a way. It means they're not, strictly bound by the Constitution, which lets them be more adaptable, to changing situations and address issues, more effectively. So, it's like the Constitution lays down the basic framework, but then the rules of business kind of allow for, flexibility and fine-tuning within that framework.
Gotcha. Okay, so within this framework, are all cabinet committees, sort of created equally? Or are there different types?
Yeah, there are actually two main types. There are standing committees, which, are permanent and deal with ongoing issues like, finance or defense. And then there are what are called ad hoc committees that are, put together for specific tasks like investigating, a big event or maybe, coming up with a new policy.
So it's a mix of kind of the permanent and the adaptable.
Exactly.
Just like India itself. But I'm guessing the prime minister probably has, a big say in all of this.
Oh, absolutely. The prime minister has the authority to, create new committees, change existing ones, or even, get rid of them altogether. So it's a really important tool for any prime minister to, shape their agenda and decide what issues they want to focus on.
Wow. So, I mean, that's a lot of power.
Yeah.
Speaking of shifting priorities, I was reading that, the number and the actual makeup of these committees have changed a lot over the years.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, for instance, back in 1994, there were 13 cabinet committees. And by 2013, that number had dropped down to 10. And then by 2016, there were only 6. So, this really shows how, the needs of the government change and how different prime ministers, approach things differently.
So even something that seems, kind of as stable as a cabinet committee can go through some major overhauls.
For sure.
It's kind of like they're constantly reshuffling the power deck, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, are there any committees that have, kind of stood the test of time? Like, are there any OG committees?
Absolutely. So there are 4 committees that are considered kind of the core, foundation of the system. And those are the committees on political affairs, economic affairs, appointments, and parliamentary affairs.
Okay, so those are the big 4. I feel like I've definitely seen those names, pop up in the news, especially the Political Affairs Committee. What's so special about that one? It always seems to be, in the middle of everything.
Yeah, you're right. That one's a big one. It's actually often called like the, super cabinet because it deals with like, the big stuff like national security, foreign policy, and, key parts of the legislative agenda. So it really kind of sets the tone for like the overall direction the government's heading in.
So if I'm picturing this right, it's like the Political Affairs Committee is like the inner circle where, the big decisions are made.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it.
Okay.
And then the other committees focus on more specific areas.
Got it.
And, for anyone trying to, do well on the UPSC, understanding these committees, what they do and how they work with each other is really important. It's not just about, knowing the names. It's about understanding the whole, power dynamic within the government.
And that dynamic gets even more fascinating when we start talking about groups of ministers, right?
Right. exactly. Groups of ministers, or ajoms, as they're usually called, kind of add this whole other layer to how decisions are made.
Okay.
You see, while those cabinet committees have, this more structured, like, ongoing role, joms are formed to deal with very specific and often, pretty complicated issues that need to be, like, looked at really carefully.
So it's kind of like bringing in, specialists when you need that certain, expertise.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I imagine this is where things get really interesting, especially, for those UPSC aspirants who really need to understand all these details.
Absolutely. I mean, imagine like a new policy needs to be drafted, maybe on renewable energy, right? So a GOM might be formed, and it would bring together, the ministers from all the relevant ministries like, power, new and renewable energy, environment, finance. And they would just dive deep into this issue, consult experts, and then finally make recommendations to the cabinet.
Okay, that makes sense. It's like forming like a mini think tank within the government, right?
Yeah.
Like pulling in all this expertise from all these different areas to tackle, this one specific challenge.
Yeah.
But wouldn't this create like, a whole bunch more bureaucracy and just like really slow things down?
Yeah, I mean, that's a valid point, and it's something that people have definitely debated. In fact, in 2014, Prime Minister Modi actually decided to get rid of all the existing GOMs and empowered groups of ministers,
Wow.
or EGOMs as they were called,
Okay.
to try and streamline decision-making and, really give more power to individual ministries.
So that's a pretty big move. I mean, did that mean the end of dooms, like for good? Did it actually, make things more efficient?
Well, the idea was, to have more accountability and faster decisions. It was thought that ministries should be able to handle things, on their own without needing all this extra consultation.
Right.
But it doesn't end there.
Okay, I have a feeling there's a twist coming.
Yeah.
Politics rarely follows a straight line.
You're telling me. So by 2015, you see this new thing emerges. Informal games.
Hold on, informal games. So are they like official or not? It sounds like a bit of a contradiction.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? It seems like even though they officially got rid of DMs, the need to have these focused discussions, between ministries,
Right.
didn't really go away.
Right.
So these informal groups kind of popped up maybe as a way to deal with, complicated issues, but without all that, formal structure and potential delays that came with the old DOMs.
So they're kind of like shadow cabinet committees for operating, behind the scenes. I can definitely see why this is something that, UPSC aspirants should really wrap their heads around. It's like this whole other layer of, power dynamics going on.
Yeah.
Could you give us like an example of how these informal jams actually work, in practice?
Sure. So even things that you might think are routine decisions, like appointments to bodies like the National Commission for Women, those were reportedly being made through these informal channels.
Wow. So they may be informal, but they sound pretty influential. It's like this, hidden network where the decisions are getting made before they even, reach those formal cabinet meetings.
Yeah.
But doesn't this, raise concerns about transparency and accountability? I mean, if these groups aren't officially, documented, how can people even know what they're doing or understand how decisions are being made?
Yeah, you've hit on like a major criticism of this system. You see, the lack of transparency around these informal GMs has led to some people worrying about, undue influence and not enough public scrutiny.
Yeah.
While, people who support them say that these groups let the government make decisions quickly and efficiently, critics worry that they operate in this kind of gray area that makes it really hard to hold them accountable.
It sounds like there's a real trade-off between, efficiency and transparency, which is something we see a lot in how governments work.
Yeah.
It's definitely something for our listeners to really consider, especially, if they're hoping to be part of the system someday.
Yeah.
But before we, really get into that debate, I'm curious, what did the Second Administrative Reforms Commission have to say about this whole JMIM system?
Right.
They're kind of the experts on, analyzing how the government is structured, right?
Exactly. And they actually did bring up some important points about too many GMs being formed, even before, the shift to these informal groups. They pointed out that having too many GMs could actually cause delays and overlap,
Right.
which would defeat the whole purpose of trying to make decisions more efficiently.
Too many cooks in the kitchen.
Exactly. So they really stress that GMs should be used, selectively and efficiently,
Okay.
whether they're formal or informal. They said any group like this should have a clear purpose, a set time frame, and the power to actually make decisions.
Right. So it's not necessarily about getting rid of GEMS completely, but about making sure